For this assignment, you're going to use data binding using the AngularJS. This is the original version of AngularJS, Angular, back in I think 2015 when it was released. It's the first version of Angular, using the model view controller paradigm, and then you bind data from the source to the view. This is a one-way binding. Here, this is the source. It's kind of tiny here. Make it bigger so you can see. So here is the source, the controller I mentioned last time. Inside this control, you have the source. The source is just the data, right? The user here has two fields, the first name and last name field. And then this is the view here. The view is basically just the template, the HTML, markup, HTML. And here uses this two curly braces, same as the handlebars, which Angular also uses. That's why I use handlebars to kind of give you a glimpse of what Angular uses. And then now this is the view. So the data coming from the view, the source out to the view. So in this example here, we're binding to the data in one-way binding from the source out to the view. Because in this way, you cannot change data in here, right? You cannot go in and modify data. You modify data down here in the code, and then it changes out here, because this is just for interpolation, right? You're rendering something to the view. You cannot make changes. That's why it's one-way direction from source to view. Okay, the other way is if you're going from the view to the source, then usually out here you would have an input tag, right? How do you send data from the view? It's always through the input tag, through a select, like drop down, through radio buttons, through a text area, comment, right? Those are inputting data. So when you make changes, those are the times you make changes to the view, and those data can then flow from the template back to the source. So that's again a one-way data binding from the view to the source. Okay, so Angular has those two models, view to source, source to view, and those are still one-way only. And then we have the two-way data binding down here. As you can see, two-way data binding. You have an input tag. That's for inputting. You're going from the view to the source. It's not shown here. And then it comes right back out to the view. In this case, it's coming to the same location, same place here. Whatever I make changes here to this input tag, it goes back to the source, comes right back up to the same place. You can't see it, okay? The way it is designed, you can't see it. So the only way to make sure that it does work is to output the source back out to the view, and that's when you see that out here, this user.first name is the same as this user.first name. Here, this is the output from the source to the view. I make changes here, it will reflect up here instantly. It's live. So it knows, it shows you that the two-way binding does work seamlessly. Well, you see that as we built this other application here. Okay, so for this exercise, you're going to need the AngularJS library. This is just a library you can install and add it to your code, just like jQuery. Okay. To get this library, you need to go to the AngularJS site. So if you go to your browser and type in AngularJS, and I'm not sure if it's the .com or not, but just type AngularJS, and it should take you, .org, okay? So there's an AngularJS.org, and the other one is the Angular itself. So if you type like Angular, I think it's .io. Okay, these are two different libraries, okay? But for this exercise, we'll need the AngularJS.org, which is this site. Okay, this is the version 1. It's simpler, easier, and you don't need to do a lot of installations. So it's just a library itself. Okay, so you need to click on this, download the AngularJS file. So click on that, and you can download it if you want, or you can just copy the CDN. Either way is fine. So this is just a URL, right? So you can copy this, or both. Okay. I'm gonna download my version here. So the version will be 1.8, and it'll be the minified version. And I'm just gonna go ahead and download that. As you can see, there are a couple ways to do it. Oops. Well, it didn't give me that. It's supposed to give me the download. It didn't download that for me. See, if I right click on it, okay. If it didn't do it for you, just right click on the button here and do it again. Right click on it and choose Save Link As. So it will download the Angular.min version. Okay. And I'm going to add that to my Documents, the Web2 folder. And I'm going to create a new folder in here, and my Web2 folder. I will just call this here data binding. Inside the data binding folder, I put the min in here. Either way you do it, however you do it is fine. And I'll leave this running for now. And so, in my file, go over here, you will see that I have my data binding. Let me close all of these. And so here's the angular.min.js. Okay. So if you save it elsewhere, just drag it and move into a directory you're going to be working with. So this is the minified version, Angular version. So Angular is a front-end application framework only. Okay, it does not work at the back end. Same with a React.js and Vue.js and Ember and many others. You have some on the front end, some on the back end. Express is a back end framework. Angular is a front end, just like a jQuery library. All right, so we got that in there, and then now we need to create an application, mainly HTML file. So in that folder, I create a new file, call it index.html. And usually you put this inside a script, right? In the JS folder. If you want to do that, you can do that. I'll just put it in the same file here, just for simplicity's sake. So now I need to also create a JavaScript file. This would be, I just call it. I don't want to call it Angular; it's confusing. So. What do you call it? I don't know. Maybe just call it main.js. Okay. I can't think of a better name. So let's go and create our index.html using the shortcut, the exclamation mark, and then hit enter. Title, you can leave it as it was, or it's called it data binding, or Angular, whatever you want to call it. And then we need to link that library here. So just like your script src is the Angular min.js. So you make sure you put that one first, and then the other is our script, main.js. All right. So similar to how you do jQuery, right? when this application runs, the Angular main.js will load. Once you load, it's going to look for a special tag. Okay, the special tag is, if you go back to the notes here, back here, the special tag is this. Okay, the ng-app equals a name of an app. Okay, in this example, it puts it in the tag of the body tag. It can be anywhere in your application. If you put in the body, that means that your entire application from the body to the end of the body tag is the Angular application itself. If you only put inside a div tag, then only the div tag is the application itself. Okay, so it depends where you put this. But for our example, we could just put this inside the body tag as well, which is fine. You can put it here. Sometimes you see that it puts up here in the HTML, which is okay too. But we can just put it here. So ng-app equals the name of this application. And you can call it whatever you want. You know, you can say my app, just like the example in the book. It's a unique application. Why is that? Well, it's possible that you could have, you know, multiple apps on the same site. So you give it a name. So this name Angular will look for this special directive. Let's go to ng-app directive, and then it will apply all the Angular frameworks application to this entire body tag. So now this is the Angular application. Angular will manage this application for us. So let's go here and put H1, and we'll just put some message so we can see. Oops, I did something kind of bad here. Why is it all caps? I don't like caps. There you go. And just put some message here, you know, data binding using AngularJS, okay? So the name of this framework is called AngularJS, I guess one word. Whereas the newer version, or the latest version now, they just call it Angular. So this is version 1. And inside here, we're going to create a div container. And we want to use this container as a controller. Remember the view controller? Okay, you want the controller to manage this view here. This is a view that can be managed by controller. So here you put another directive called ng-controller, and you give it a name. I want the controller to manage everything inside this div tag. So the book uses the user controller, and usually that's how you name it. I mean, the naming is there's no rule. It's common to have like that: user controller, home controller, you know, weather controller, something controller, so you know that it's a controller. So as you can see in the book here, it uses it's called the user controller, right? So we can use that example. It's fine too. User controller or places controller, doesn't matter. So maybe we'll call it well, yeah, okay. So user controller is fine. So this controller, this name here is important. Okay, it's really important because I can have another one. For example, you don't have to do this. Have a lot of controllers. This is a use controller. This is maybe the place controller. This is, you know, you get the idea, right? Login controller, things like that. So each of these will be managed by its own controller in the code, okay? For us, we're just gonna have one. So we have the use controller here, and we use this, we're not gonna use this. So it will control this div tag. Whatever you put here will be, Angular can see the data inside here. That's what it's saying. Outside of this tag, Angular cannot control it. Or I mean, the controller does not control it. Okay, so this controller, now we go back to the code, back in the main.js. We need to create an application which is going to be mapped to this application called my app. In this case, going to create a module equals this is my app, and then inside this app, you're going to add a controller called user controller so we can manage data here. And back here, if you go up to the code up here, you will see this structure here, okay? So I'm going to copy this, save us some typing, and just place it right inside our code here, and I'll explain what they are, okay? And the format here. So the first line up here is creating an object to our module. We call it my app. So this is just the syntax, the rules. You just have to memorize this. And this is just a variable. You can call it whatever you want, right? It's just a local variable, just like express, right? Equals to require express, same thing. And through this my app here refers to this app here, okay? This my app here is this my app here. So this module, we add this to Angular module. Angular manages this application called my app. And then this is my app, we can add controllers. One of the controllers we just created is called a user controller. That's this guy right here. We control this div tag called user controller. And so this controller function takes two parameters, kind of similar to other you've seen, right? The event listener and so on, or the user, some similar controller format. So the name of the controller itself, followed by the anonymous function, a function you call user controller, and you pass into this user controller function. This is you just call it, okay? It doesn't have to be user controller, you call it whatever you want. It's just function. You pass in a variable called scope with a $sign. Okay, a $sign scope. This is a special object. This scope variable here is an object that manages or binds, okay, that allows Angular to bind data from this controller data from the source. This is called the source, to this view here. This is the view, okay? The entire template is a template, but this is the view itself. The Angular view is inside here. So it manages that for us through the scope. And any data that you want to pass out to that view, okay, let me do this. Okay, so any data that you want to, pass out to this view here must be a property of the scope object, like you see here, scope.user. Okay, and then so that is a part of the Angular framework. Okay, so the user is, if you take out the scope, it looks just like that, right? Just like a variable, it's an object, has two fields, but if you don't attach it to the scope, it's not going to be visible outside the controller and the view here. Okay, so that's why you must attach it to the scope if you want to use it. So now, just use the author's name here, for example. So this field, this user object or variable, has two fields: first name, key value pair, as you can see, object. So then outside here in the controller, the view, you can then create data, and here I put here, first name, and then you bind to the data here using the notation of the dot notation, user dot first name, user dot last name. So I'm not going to put scope here, okay? You're not going to put scope like that. It's automatic. So that means I'm going to ignore the scope and just use the variable user dot first name. So I'm binding data, one-way data binding. Okay, I'm binding data, binding this variable, this field, to this p tag and this location here. One way, the data is coming from the source. This is the source because the source code of the JavaScript, the source code, going out to the view. Okay, so one-way binding from source to view, because I cannot change data here. I can change down here, so it flows from here to here. Okay, so that's the first name, and you can add another one here. You put the last name here. As you can see, it looks very similar to handlebars, except the handlebars we pass in the on the front and the back end, right, through the to the render function. Here it passed through the scope object. Okay, so I save this file, and we're going to run. Well, save the main file as well, main.js file, and we're going to run the HTML file here on the live server. I don't have a live server. If you run the index file, you should see the result. Okay, so now if you right-click and go to the live server, and you're going to see the result here. So here's the name. Let me minimize my screen. You can see the name here. Let's close all of these here. Let's close all these here. Okay. So we rendered the name of the user, that first name and last name here. And if you press the F12, you look at it, you inspect. If you inspect the data and the elements under, let me get a look at a big, you can kind of see. So what's taking place, okay? You see that it adds a class ng-scope automatically by Angular. We did not add that. Same thing here. And Angular adds, and then again, this class ng binding, just a CSS class. It's a special class in Angular, I guess you use that. And it renders the variable, the value to our location here, okay? The result already. And down here, you can see another script has been added. We did not add this. Right, we did not add that. Angular does it automatically. It's something that Angular manages, injects itself inside the program here. How does it know? Well, because we tell it here. We says in this app, Angular can manage this entire app. So it's able to inject whatever data it needs to make this work. But all we see is just this user has been added, the name and last name has been added to the view here. So again, as you can see, I cannot change it, right? It's a one-way binding. We bind data from the source to the view. All right? So if you add more data, say go over here, you add another field, maybe like title, and we'll put here CEO. Right? I just added a title called CEO, and save that. If you want to add out here, you do the same thing. You can put another p tag here. Title will be user.ceo. So all these here are a part of the user. If you have a variable inside here in this class, this function here, say, you know, a variable called points, right? Points is 100. Okay, because it's not attached to the scope here, you can't use it, even though it's inside this function. Okay, so if I go here and I want to do points, let's do here. It's not going to work. Okay, because point is not part of the scope. So I just want to show you that it won't work. I misspelled title. Title, and this would be title, sorry, not CEO. Okay, so say that, and I refresh my page. You can see that the name comes through, the title comes through, but points does not come through because it's not part of the object, not part of the scope. So if you want to display on the view, you must attach it to the scope. You can use this if you want. Sometimes you need this because you want to do some, you know, a calculation of some sort, and then you add that to the points here. So to make this work, you can do something like, okay, well, I want to add to the points. Then you would do something like this. You would say scope dot points is equal to that points. Okay, so this point here is this point. This is a part of the scope which should be visible to the browser. As you can see, it's points. Because I don't have just a straight variable, I don't put the dot notation here. This is an object, right? User dot first name, user dot something. Here is point equal to a number. So I save that, and if you go back to the browser, you should see the value being displayed here. Okay, so there is points. It's attached to the scope object. So you can have a lot of different properties if you want to display on the browser and attach to the scope. If you remember, we talked about Node, the exports object, kind of same idea, right? Exports that, something equals something. Export that something equals something. Same thing. Scope that user equals this. Scope that points equals this, and so on. So you can have a lot of information here, and you can, and again, it must be inside this div tag though. If I, move this out, say that outside of that div tag, okay, is no longer part of this div tag, so therefore it does not know what this is. You're gonna get just whatever you see here, right? It doesn't render that anymore because it does not know what that is. Okay, it needs to be managed by the user controller. It must reside inside that div tag. Okay, so that's one-way binding from the view to the source. Now the next one is we're going to do another binding from the view. This is from source to view. We'll do one from view to source. Okay, so the view. So out here, let's say you have another div tag. And I'll put inside I'll put inside the same scope here, okay? We'll put here, you put another div tag, I guess. And well, you know what? I think we'll just do the two-way, and that also shows you the one-way as well. Okay, so here we're going to do a input. Input here is going to be bind to the ng model. So back here, I think I closed it because the two-way data binding does both. I want to we can just do that. So here, the ng model. Okay, so the type is text. You don't have to put it there, but it's automatic. So you're going to bind it to ng.model is equal to, and then the user.firstname. So this user.firstname is the same as this one here. Now I'm binding this from the view as the input tag. It binds directly to this variable here, right? User.firstname. So from this part, it's going from, if I make changes to this input tag, I'm changing the data because the data is stored in the view. The data will flow back through the scope object and then go to this property called user, to this first name field and change this variable data. Just by doing that alone, just this simple tag here, okay? So if I save that and go to the browser, so here, as you can see, it's a two-way binding. Why? Because the data in the source flows back out here, a place where I cannot edit. it also flows here where I can edit. So if I make changes here, you see it changes live, right? Okay, that's two-way binding because whatever I change here is flowing from the view back to the source. It changes instantly, and it flows back from the source out to the same view here. I can't tell because it's the input tag. And so we put outside in a separate tag. You can see that as I make changes, it updates live. So that's one-way binding. In this case, it's two-way binding because I'm changing data from the source and the view. Here I'm changing from the view. If I find a way to change data in the source, of course this will also be changed. Let's see how I do this. Okay, so let's say that we're gonna do something kind of let's see. Yeah, so usually you would have another mechanism to change the data in the view, in the source. So for example, if I do this, just to show you quickly, and let me close this. So here's the view, the source. Okay, it's the source. If I change data here to let's save that first. I change it to if I save it, this and this should be changed, okay? If I save it, right? So I'm changing the source, it updates in the view. If I change it in the view, it updates the source, okay? So that's what I mean by data binding. It flows in both directions. If it's not bound, then it should not change here. So it's kind of a little bit hard to illustrate here in this old version, but next time when we learn AngularJS, the Angular version, you'll see that it's actually easier to do that.